In 2008, Kenya was in deep turmoil. The country was reeling from the brutal post-election violence of 2007-2008, a tragedy that took over 1,000 lives, left more than 600,000 people without homes, and nearly brought down an already fragile economy. Amid this national crisis, another scandal was quietly unfolding behind the scenes. Billions were being siphoned off taxpayer money by the state-owned Kenya Pipeline Company. At the heart of it was Yagnesh Devani, a well-connected businessman who, according to reports, masterminded one of Kenya's most daring fuel heists, the 7.6 billion Triton oil scandal. Through a network of corruption, Devani orchestrated the theft of billions from the Kenya Pipeline Company, which not only crippled fuel supplies but also further destabilized the economy. Yet, even with such a huge loss, no one was ever held responsible. For 16 long years, Devani evaded justice while the Kenyan government spent millions trying to catch him. Although he was eventually arrested and extradited to Kenya, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions dropped the case because there wasn't enough evidence, allowing one of the nation's most wanted fugitives to walk free. In this episode, we'll break down how Devani, through his company Triton, carried out this massive fraud and how his powerful connections kept him protected. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories from Kenya. In July 2000, Yagnesh Devani started Triton Petroleum Limited with a bold plan to break into Kenya's tightly controlled oil industry. At that time, large multinational companies dominated the industry through the open tender system, where bids to import petroleum were given to the lowest bidder. This system naturally favored big international firms, making it very difficult for independent players like Triton. This changed in 2004 when the government introduced the collateral financing agreements. The CFA was designed to help small companies by allowing banks to lend up to 80% of the money needed for the petroleum imports, using the oil itself as collateral. Once shipments arrived and were stored at Kenya Pipeline Company, Triton will let other oil marketing companies know that the stock was available, giving them 14 days to pay. If the buyers paid in full, the banks would release the oil. If not, the financiers would take control of the oil and sell it. Kenya Pipeline was required to send regular stock reports to the lenders, adding a layer of transparency. Even though Triton had less than 1% of Kenya's petroleum market, it had a breakthrough by securing the country's very first CFA agreement with Kenya Pipeline in 2004. This success was helped by Devani's extensive political connections, which had already landed him lucrative supply contracts with the Kenya Power and Lighting Company, one of the nation's biggest buyers of petroleum. Major financial institutions like Kenya Commercial Bank, PTA Bank, Glencore Energy UK, and the Emirates National Oil Company backed Triton, providing the capital needed to participate in the open tender system and grow its presence. Devani's influence and connections weren't just political. In 2005, investigators uncovered a series of suspicious transactions involving Charterhouse Bank. There were 5 transfers of 10 million shillings each, totaling to 50 million shillings from Triton to accounts in the name of Devani's wife, Sonal. For more details on these questionable dealings, check out our documentary on Kenya's Dirtiest Bank after watching this video. In 2006, Triton opened its new LPG depot in Nairobi. High-profile guests, including then Vice President Mudi Awori, Raila Odinga, and Uhuru Kenyatta, attended the event. These strong political connections likely helped Triton secure a special deal in 2006 that gave it control to 50% of the storage capacity at Kenya Pipeline Company's Kipevu oil storage facility in Mombasa, even though Triton had less than 1% of the market share. This unusual allocation raised serious questions from other oil marketing companies.
Questioned the rationale behind the allocation of 50% storage space for Triton despite its insignificant market share. Triton, which commanded a market share of less than 1%, monopolized the Kipevu storage facility, forcing other players to incur huge losses in demurrage charges as their vessels waited to discharge. Apparently, all this was happening with the full knowledge of Ministry of Energy officials, to whose attention the matter was raised several times.
Jacob Segman, the CEO of Kenol Kobil, Kenya's largest oil marketer at the time, publicly criticized this special treatment, arguing that storage space should be in proportion to market share. The breakdown at the time was Kenol Kobil 22.4%, Shell 21.8%, Total Energies 21.2%, Chevron or Caltex 13%, Oil Libya 7.3%, National Oil 2.4%, and independents, including Triton, shared 11.5%. These figures show a stark contrast between Triton's tiny market share and its disproportionately large storage allocation. Yet, no one took action to challenge this decision. The fraud was very complex. The collateral financing agreement was supposed to secure financing for oil imports by relying on accurate inventory records maintained at Kenya Pipeline. At this time, KPC was in the process of installing an advanced computerized system to track products and stock movements. However, the system wasn't fully up and running and couldn't provide live data. This gap allowed Devani and a few corrupt KPC employees, especially the schedulers who oversaw fuel releases, to manipulate records. They made it look like the fuel was still in storage while it was actually being siphoned off and sold on the black market. These officials even produced fake release letters to convince the financial institutions that the oil stocks were safe and intact. By late 2007, Kenya was in crisis. The post-election violence had not only thrown society into chaos, but also damaged transport systems. The disruption in road and rail networks masked Triton's activities as people assumed the fuel shortages were due to the unrest rather than systemic theft.
It is 2:30 in one of the fueling stations in the Central Business District, but this particular station doesn't have sufficient petrol. This despite the government giving assurance that come the end of Wednesday, there'll be sufficient supply of the commodity. So who is fooling who between the government and the oil marketers?
Neighboring countries like Uganda, which depend on fuel imported through Kenya's port of Mombasa, felt the impact as well. Triton took advantage by diverting more product into black market channels where prices were rising due to an artificial scarcity. Then, in mid-2000, as the post-election crisis started to settle, the situation took a turn for the worst. Oil prices, which had been high and supported Triton's scheme, suddenly plummeted. From a high of $147 per barrel in July to $32 per barrel by December. Triton's business model depended on buying fuel at lower prices, storing it, and selling it at higher prices in the black market. With the drastic drop in oil prices, Triton couldn't sell the stolen fuel at the expected high profits. As conditions worsened, mounting debts to banks and suppliers pushed the company toward collapse. By November 2008, almost 1 year after the fraud began, Triton's shaky financial situation could no longer hide the truth. Growing pressure from oil marketers and financiers forced the Kenya Pipeline Company to take a hard look at its oil stocks. KPC conducted a full internal forensic audit that left no detail unchecked. The audit revealed shocking facts. Triton, which had won a tender to import 80,000 tons of crude and refined oil, ended up delivering only 56,000 tons.
4% before they went under. So for people to allege that Triton was supposed to have brought in 80,000 metric tons, and instead of bringing that, they brought in 56. Sorry, that was not correct. But they failed to deliver on 80,000 metric tons.
The anomaly, which was also raised in the audit report by Deloitte, was variously ignored and had never been acted upon. By his own admission, Triton has on instances failed to deliver on its commitment to import 80,000 metric tons of fuel. But why was the company not penalized as specified under the open tender system?
For these issues that you are trying to push onto me, please spare me.
Instead, that obligation is said to have been transferred to another company, while Triton was left to go scot-free without paying the 100 million shillings in stipulated penalties. The question is, what did Nyoike know?
The audit went further. It was discovered that about 126.4 million liters of oil, worth roughly 7.6 billion and enough to power the country for nearly 20 days, had been released without the approval of the financiers. Normally, these stocks should have been kept in trust for the lenders. Instead, they were diverted to Triton between November 2007 and November 2008. When KPC shared these findings, financiers were shocked to learn that no oil stocks were actually held in trust. This revelation sparked a chain reaction. Kenya Commercial Bank, one of the main financiers, quickly took legal action, and by the end of December 2008, Triton was placed under receivership.
The government believes the arrest of Yagnesh Devani will unravel the truth about the mega scandal, which has so far cost the jobs of Kenya Pipeline Managing Director George Okungu, Chairman James Kenani, and Operations Manager Peter Mecha. 3 senior managers at Kenya Commercial Bank have also been shown the door, as details of the complex web of the scam continue to emerge.
We're doing everything possible to make sure that the fraud which has been committed is fully investigated and the culprits are brought to book.
By that time, Triton's debt had ballooned to an incredible 7.6 billion Kenya shillings, with KCB owed 1.85 billion, Glencore 2.3 billion, Fortis Bank 906 million, and the Emirates National Oil Company 2.5 billion shillings. As evidence against Triton Petroleum mounted, attention focused on its mastermind, Yagnesh Devani. Anticipating legal action, Devani fled Kenya in December 2008, just before the scandal became public. He first sought refuge in India and then moved to the United Kingdom in 2009. Kenyan authorities issued an arrest warrant for Devani and began extradition proceedings. Interpol responded by issuing a red notice, effectively listing Devani among Kenya's most wanted fugitives and enabling international efforts to locate and apprehend him.
The arrest of Mr. Devani, he appeared in court, had bail hearings. He's now out with, as you know, an electronic tag and his passport removed, and the next stage is an extradition hearing, which I'm sure will be very swift.
After years of legal proceedings, the UK Court of Appeal dismissed Devani's asylum application in May 2020, paving way for his extradition. On January 23, 2024, he was returned to Kenya to face charges related to the 2008 Triton oil scandal. Devani was charged with multiple counts, including fraud, conspiracy, and the illegal sale of fuel. Prosecutors alleged that he orchestrated the fraudulent withdrawal and sale of millions of liters of fuel, resulting in significant financial losses. However, during the trial, key evidence was missing and crucial witnesses were unavailable or uncooperative. Notably, former Energy Minister Kiraitu Murungi declined to testify and technical experts from the Kenya Pipeline Company were absent. The prosecution struggled to present a cohesive case. Energy PS Patrick Nyoike had claimed he was kept in the dark about the illegal dealings, even vowing to step aside if implicated. But as a top official, questions remained about how such a massive fraud could occur without oversight awareness. The Director of Public Prosecutions withdrew the charges against Devani due to a lack of conclusive evidence. After 16 years as a fugitive, Devani walked free, highlighting challenges in prosecuting high-profile corruption cases. The Triton scandal is often overlooked, and much of the information surrounding it is very difficult to uncover, which feels like a deliberate effort to suppress what really happened. Those in the political class who likely benefited from the heist have remained silent, offering no acknowledgement of their involvement. The courts have stated that the case could be reopened if new evidence comes to light, but given the history of similar cases in Kenya, it seems unlikely that this scandal will ever resurface. But that's just my 2 cents. I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comment section. You can also watch the Charterhouse documentary if you haven't already. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories from Kenya.